Hello, class. So this is part two of notes on Melissa McBay Merritt's essay, "The Moral Source of the Kantian Sublime." So I'm picking up on the term she uses of Kant's we're calling vocation. She reminds us in the reading that vocation could also be Bestimmung, the German word Bestimmung, which she translates as determination. I remember talking about this in class in terms of how it is that we understand harmony as well. So, determination and harmony are also a way of understanding vocation. So, admittedly, with deontology's importance of rationally understood duty, we also possess a similar normative goal with our aesthetic life. So, as mcbay Merritt reads Kant, we have a vocation to lift ourselves up. We have an aim, in other words, we have an aim. We have an aim toward harmony and determination to lift ourselves up to the best of our rational nature. This is not unlike the fundamental importance of conscientiousness for natural law theory. So we're aiming toward the good, and that is a lifting up. The German word for sublime, she indicates, also has a similar meaning of lifting up. The word is das Erheben, which basically means to raise up. So vocation and the sublime, lifting up as a vocation. So Kant's vocation to lift ourselves up to the best of our rational nature is sublime. The aesthetical reflection of the sublime is a way of getting us from the sensible to the supersensible. Okay? So we are taken from the sensible to the supersensible aesthetically and likewise conscientiously. For instance, as highlighted above, we cognitively experience pleasure, terror, fear, etc. in a sublime encounter with nature. For instance, the Grand Canyon, tornado chasing, etc. Similarly, we find a sublime vocation in the sphere of ethical life, with the perennial wish for world peace, ending discrimination, stopping oppression, well-being for the environment, etc. So both instances, the conscientious and the aesthetic, are expressing a sublime reach beyond the confines of basic understanding. So we always must acknowledge a mathematical and dynamic reach beyond epistemological, aesthetical, and ethical limitations. This is sublime. So here I have a little diagram where I have reason understood epistemologically, aesthetically, and ethically, added to our sublime vocation aimed toward the good, equals infinity. In other words, and we could probably even say eternity. I don't have a symbol for eternity, so I have a little the mathematical symbol here for infinity, but it should it should serve as defining both. So in other words, there's always a reach beyond in terms of how it is that we understand something epistemologically, fancy word for way we understand knowledge, and likewise in terms of how it is that we understand things in terms of aesthetic pleasure, and then likewise how it is that we respect what is ethical as aimed toward the good. Okay, so a sublime experience is always exceeding the rational and the empirical, the sensory, infinitely and eternally. So that's my diagram there. So if we compare this insight to Kant's example from the Critique of Pure Reason, it's clear that the ethical humility one has for the person of upright character i.e., the humble common man, or common person, we look at a quote from the Critique of Pure Reason. Okay, so here we have Kant writing, Fontenelle says, I bow before an eminent man, but my spirit does not bow. I can add, Kant writes, I can add, before a humble common man in whom I perceive uprightness of character in a higher degree than I am aware of in myself, my spirit bows, whether I want it or whether I do not, and hold my head ever so high that he may not overlook my superior position. Why is this? His example holds before me a law that strikes down my self-conceit when I compare it with my conduct, and I see observance that law, and hence its practicability, proved before me in fact. Okay, so let's just repeat that. So Kant writes at the end, his example of the humble man before me, it holds before me a law that strikes down my self-conceit when I compare it with my conduct, and I see observance of that law, and hence its practicability proved before me in fact. Okay, unquote. So that's Kant's excerpt from the Critique of Pure Reason. So with Kant's ethical illustration here, mcbay Merritt shows that the idea that my spirit bows is internal, and that this internal humility is rational as much as it is reaching. Okay, it is our rational vocation to conscientiously recognize, respect, and cherish ethical behavior that reaches far beyond our own. So not only is this recognition / respect of ethical behavior going beyond our own, we simultaneously recognize the humble common man or person as a practical aim and as an ethical role model. In all honesty, this aim is ethical. While it is not brought about with ease, we are reluctantly humble. Okay, so the reaction of aversion and reluctance locates a sublime parallel with the aesthetical sublime in terms of fear and terror. Remember the fear and terror that we have, for example, when we're thinking or when we're confronting, say, an oncoming tornado, if we're tornado chasers, that sort of thing. That is an equivalent to this aversion and reluctance we have when we recognize something that we want to be in terms of our vocation, and by way of the example that is other than us or beyond us. In other words, the humility, the humility that this person that we see exemplifies brings about in us a recognition that we can move beyond ourselves, and oftentimes we are reluctant, and sometimes that is an aversion of who we are. And so in that regard, there's a similarity to the ethical sublime and likewise the aesthetical sublime. Okay? So what I have written here is the reaction. Okay, so we are often in need of a sublime moral experience to bring the tough to face lesson of humility into our practice. Okay? So don't forget the role of the arts here. So, for example, dramatic portrayals, as in movies, in literature, plays, etc., of respecting humility serve as a classic and tragic expressions of this practical sublime lesson. Practically sublime lesson, oddly enough. Okay, so Let's conclude with mcbay Merritt's selected exquisite excerpt from Kant's Critique of Practical Reason. This is a quote from the Critique of Practical Reason from 1788. Quote, "Two things," so this is Kant writing, "two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and reverence. The more often and more steadily one reflects upon them, the starry heavens above and the moral law above me. The first view of a countless multitude of worlds annihilates, as it were, my importance as an animal creature. Okay. The second, on the contrary, infinitely raises my worth as an intelligence by my personality, in which the moral law reveals to me a life independent of animality and even the whole sensible world." So I'm going to leave that as an open question as far as what that means in light of what we've discussed in part 1 and part 2. So thank you and have a wonderful day.